Hi everyone. Award would like to begin by acknowledging and paying our respects to the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, who are the traditional custodians of the land on which we broadcast today. Award would also like to acknowledge their culture of storytelling through art, dance and music. And we pay respect to the elders past, present and future on other lands throughout all communities who might be participating today. So welcome everyone to Work Behind the Work. Today we're going to be talking about the amazing piece of work which is the Australian Open Ambush for Uber Eats. This is the first in the series of 4 that we're doing, where we look behind what happened to make that work come to life. And these are the 4 of some of the best pieces of work for the year. So often great work inspires you to think about, how did they think of that? How did they sell that? And how did they make that? So they're the kind of things we'll be looking at today, or Tom and Jules will be. And we'll hear more about that, about the process and the inspiration. So during the presentation, you can add questions to the Q&A box. And this presentation will also be recorded and made available at a later date. So to moderate the session, we have Maddie Burton and Dave Bowman. There's a little bit here about them. Maddie and Dave lead Google's partner innovation team in APAC, a team working in 19 markets across the region, dedicated to doing creative things for brands with Google technology that have been done before. They also developed a groundbreaking program called Create with Google, aimed at helping the creative community use Google's 380 plus products and platforms to maximum effect. Before Google, they spent the majority of their careers working together in creative agencies, founded their own startup, Special Group, leading TBWA's group of creative companies in Sydney and across the region, and were instrumental figures in the formative years of Droga5's New York operation, as well as the Glue Society. They've been lucky enough to be recognised for their work with over 40 Cannes Lions, including a Grand Prix and 2 Titanium Lions, and have been in the book over a dozen times at D&AD. And they are firm believers in the commercial power of creativity in all its forms. Over to you, Maddie and Dave.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you very much for having us. And thanks for the intro, Tara. We've got the awesome task of being able to introduce Tom and Jules, obviously working as Chief Creative Officers and Partners at Special Group Australia, and with an illustrious career behind them and ahead of them. Obviously, they first established themselves as creatives and then creative directors of Clemenger BBO Melbourne. They then moved to New York to become the ECDs of Johannes Leonardo, New York.
But I guess it's the work behind the CCOs that we're actually going to talk about as well, because that's what kind of made them famous. But you'll know this work, and you should know this work. Campaigns like the 4 and 20 Magic Salad Plate, that's my personal favourite one, to be honest. The Guide Dog Australia's Support Scent, Tourism Victoria's Remote Control Tourist, Pedigree's K9 FM, and if you're not familiar with that, I'd encourage you to listen to it because the writing in it is exceptional. They're also renowned for turning the banking world on its head with a campaign for NAB called the Breakup Campaign, and that took out Cannes Grand Prix and spikes and pretty much everywhere else, including effectiveness awards, which is, the most creative work being effective.
A couple of years ago, in 2018, Tom and Jules highly controversial interactive Stop the Horror campaign, which helped Victoria become the first state in Australia, in fact, to legalise euthanasia. And last year it received the Best in Show and the Chairman's Award at Australia's preeminent creative award show award. 3 D&AD pencils, as well as 3 gold lions and a silver at Cannes.
But most recently, and what we're here today to talk about, the work that they've done at Special Group, where the pair were responsible for the Uber Eats Australian Open Ambush campaign. And that campaign's been declared not only creatively brilliant, but also groundbreaking media integration. And a completely innovative way of doing sports sponsorships.
So they've got hundreds of advertising awards to their name, including 34 Cannes Lions, a Cannes Lion Grand Prix, D&AD Black Pencil, multiple yellow pencils, a one-show gold pencil, and a record of 5 Best of Shows at award. So without bigging them up any more, because they may sort of blast out of screen, I'm going to hand over to Tom and Jules.
All right.
Thanks, that was embarrassing.
Yeah, thanks for that glowing introduction. I think this is a great thing to talk about, actually. The thing that happened, all the stuff that happened behind the Oz Open ambush, because it's actually quite a story and quite an unorthodox story. So what we're going to do is we're going to share screen now.
We thought it was easy if we share a deck, because I think it'll make us not ramble and it should keep it pretty tight.
Please tell me if everyone can see that. Tom, can you see that, just to confirm?
Yep.
Okay, so yeah, I think the premise of the talk is really we all see thousands and thousands of case studies, and they're always all the glory and all the good things that happened. But I thought that it'd be really interesting if we actually told you the stuff that wasn't in the case study, because that seems like an interesting thing. Because the truth is, with this particular project, it was quite a roller coaster. This is what the award board looks like, which is all the, as Tom was saying earlier, potential lies, but I like to prefer to think of it as selected truth, which is all the good news. But now we'll take you through the story.
We'll try to cover everything and ask questions if we don't. But so this is a quote from our client, Georgie. So she said, "We're thinking of sponsoring the tennis, but only if you come up with something worthwhile and you have a week." So what happened was, on a Sunday night, Kate, MD, and myself got a call to go in and see her Monday morning, and we met her with Channel 9, Mediacom and Tennis Australia. Mediacom, Tennis Australia and Channel 9, I think they thought we were presenting ideas. We thought we were getting briefed. But what actually happened then was we heard what the parameters were, they went away, and then Georgie, our client, said, look, if you come up with something amazing, we'll sponsor the tennis, but we have to go back really quickly because they thought we were coming there with answers and we weren't. So we had a week to come back to them with our ambush. So it was a ridiculously tight deadline, but we have such a amazing relationship with Georgie and she's such a great client. It wasn't that daunting, but a week is still a ridiculously tight timeline.
Then our creative team, and we had a whole bunch of ideas, including I think we had an idea where we were going to have a cameraman's stomach groaning throughout the entire AO, hungry for food, and I'm glad we didn't go there. But essentially they said, almost as like one of their first ideas, this is just so simple. We'll just get the tennis players to say tonight I'll be eating during the tennis. And that was Nick Cole and Pat Allenby. And it sounds brilliantly simple, but it's a problem which we sort of realised immediately, which is...
So I guess one of the hard things is it essentially had to be executionally perfect. Like it literally had to be the tennis. And I think that's because making ads look like sport's not new. Like if you watch the tennis, there was like there was a Mario Kart ad where Rafa was playing against Mario. There's been back pain ads, I think, where an umpire groans because he's got, sore back, but it looks like the tennis. We knew that you couldn't just do an ad that looked like the tennis. We literally had to make the tennis. So the job for us, and this was what made it so difficult, was we had to perfectly replicate the tennis, and that was sort of what started an amazingly hard few weeks.
Yeah, I guess that I would say that's probably the creative aspect of this, is actually replicating the tennis. So we presented the idea to Georgie, and we presented it and said, and we said to her up front, look, if we get on this ride, this is going to be us having to figure out exactly how to replicate the tennis and we need to sort of figure out how to do that. And she, because Georgie's an amazing client, not sure how we were going to do it, pretty much said, you know what, we're going to go for it. Let's do this thing. I'm excited by this idea. And then she said, oh, and by the way.
So this was the challenge. Most sponsorship work, like we actually spoke to, during this process, we actually spoke to Federer about being one of the talent. And he said, oh yeah, sure. But you would have had to have talked to me in July, which was 7 months earlier. When we presented this idea, it was actually 5 weeks out from the tennis. So we actually only had 5 weeks. And we hadn't written scripts at this stage. We just had a one-pager saying what we're going to do. So in those 5 weeks, we not only had to write scripts, we had to cast all the tennis players, work out how we're going to shoot it. Luckily, we've got a pretty tight team at Specials, so we sort of knew internally we could group together and work out how to do it together. But Glue Society played a pivotal role in this, and I think I think that happens on most jobs. You need to find the people who you work with the best and people who you can trust. And we have an amazing relationship with JK and Glue, so they got on board pretty quickly and worked out with us how you could do this in 5 weeks.
Yeah, and we essentially had to work out a process where we knew that we could do script writing, casting, the shooting, and then after that, the actual editing and the whole approval process, plus the media booking and the placements, all had to be condensed into a timeline that was so small that really all the hierarchies and layers of things just actually wouldn't allow it to happen. So then the first sort of thing arose, which is, given the speed that we're moving at, given the negotiations that are happening in parallel with coming up with the idea and setting this up, we can't tell you which tennis players you're going to end up with. And we thought, okay, well, the only way to make that work is if we basically write scripts that could be potentially for any tennis player, right? So we'll have to make sure that whatever we do is almost completely interchangeable. And then the other thing that came up straight away was not only can you not be told what tennis players you're going to have, you're only going to be able to afford to have one tennis player at a time, but not only that, because we're trying to replicate the tennis perfectly, we don't know who they're going to be playing. So we have to make sure that the scripts only work in a way where you only see one tennis player. And that was absolutely critical.
And then here's one of the craziest parts. You can only have each tennis player for 1 hour max. So Nadal, he turned up and we had him for 1 hour to shoot 3 30-second TV ads in 1 hour. I think we're sort of lucky that, and we're sort of lucky that most of the ad was actually replicating the tennis. So for probably 20 of the 30 seconds, all they had to do was bounce a ball, serve a ball. They had to do tennis stuff, and thankfully they do that every day, so they could do that. The bit we had no idea whether they could do was act, we had to do 3 ads in an hour. So you sort of had to, and I think it's you could still debate whether Nadal could act in that ad, that picture there, where he's debating with the umpire. Like, I think most people would probably say couldn't, but I think that was part of his charm. But you did have to capture an enormous amount in an hour, and we had to rewrite scripts constantly because they just wouldn't do things. Like, we found out while we were shooting they wouldn't serve, because if they're going to serve, they don't want to hurt their arm before the game, because we were shooting just days before the AO started, because we had to shoot on the court where the court was set up for before the game. And they weren't going to serve for us because they could hurt themselves. So you had to do things where they wouldn't hurt themselves. The only one that would serve and hurt himself was Kyrgios. He just did not care, but everyone else wouldn't do it. So you had to sort of work out a way to shoot, to make it look like you were shooting tennis, but shoot around tennis, because they actually wouldn't probably play tennis. And that made it ridiculously difficult. So Jules, myself, Pat and Nick, and actually everyone, because there was no real, our hierarchy, all the layers and what jobs people had just vanished on this shoot. We just had to sit there and just brainstorm, like, what else can they do? Like, we've got so many ads sitting on the bench. We've got so many ads milling around the baseline. We just had to sit there and brainstorm constantly all day what the tennis players could do and where we could put them and what they could pretend to do. And
yeah. Another critical thing was we worked out really quickly that the traditional production model wouldn't work, where we actually got a crew. We actually had to create a hybrid crew between Glue Society and actually the channel, the Australian Open camera people who actually shot the tennis, because they were the only people who actually understood how to get the correct angles and position the cameras perfectly. And we also had to make sure that we had to shoot it essentially like the tennis, where we had 4 cameras going at once so we could do takes really quickly. Because if we actually had taken the time to get every different angle, there's no way we would have been able to achieve getting every tennis player in the time frame we had. We only had 1 hour with each. So essentially we only had like 2 or 3 takes each time. And
a lot of players, we didn't even know that day if we were going to get them. So some of the days we were just sitting there in the morning and the Tennis Australia would come out and go, okay, this afternoon from 7 till 8, you can have this player. And we're like, and then we'd go, okay, and then you just have to write again, work out what scripts could work for that player.
Yeah, and then, as we said before, we had no idea if they could act, but we sort of assumed that basically what's sort of, beautifully brilliant about Tonight I'll Be Eating as a concept is that all it is essentially turning to camera and saying one line, which actually turns out to be much harder than most people think it is. But apart from that, all they were doing was having to do do a food order. The thing that we didn't realize, apart from the actual acting that we talked about before, is that also we had to be creative about the food order and realize that people like Rafa have quite thick Spanish accents. And suddenly we were discovering that they would say food and people wouldn't actually understand the food that they were saying. So we would constantly be changing the food orders all the time, which meant one of the things that we had done in other Tonight I'll Be Eating commercials, which was actually shouting out loud restaurants, we couldn't do in this campaign because essentially the food kept on changing. So we couldn't actually make arrangements with the restaurant to commit to any particular type of food.
I think the other thing we haven't put in this deck, which actually does make plays a massive part in this and actually made it happen, is I think we're the only agency in Australia that has a full-time talent person. And that's because of Tonight I'll Be Eating at Uber Eats, and because of how we use the celebrities, and we do that for a lot of markets. We actually have a person who full-time just negotiates talent. And that actually helped make this possible as well, because that person was working full-time getting the people for these ads. Like every day they'd swap out, get new people in. Okay, this is a crazy big problem.
Yeah, essentially, let's just say you get all the players that you want. We don't even know if the players that we put in the ads are going to make it past the first day, which means the trick that we're creating, which is putting their ad inside their tennis match, may only last for one tennis match.
So you could pay for Nadal, and it wasn't as expensive as most celebrities because the ads had a 2-week period. They literally ran for 2 weeks and they ended. So it wasn't the expense, but it was just assets would die every day. Like you'd have ads that would just disappear.
Yeah. So we made a rule, which was basically we'd get lots and lots of tennis players of completely different pay scales, and do lots and lots of different executions, which once again came to us sitting there brainstorming, coming up with as many scripts as possible. And we sort of had a rule that the trick only really had to work once in the first tennis match that people were in, and then after that we would be able to repeat them again, so people got longevity. So really the first week of the tennis, because the tennis goes for 2 weeks, you got to do the trick properly, but then after that we would try and repeat some scripts, but then add new ones along the way.
The other thing that I think, it wasn't just about with the tennis players get knocked out in their first match. We didn't want to use all their ads in their first match. So in Nadal's first match, we didn't want to play all 3 ads in his first match because it just meant we didn't have any more for the rest of his games. They all would have been seen. So we actually held back ads. So all the ads we had with players, we played their first one in their first match, and then we held back the second for their second match, etc. So there was a massive risk that actually some of the ads we shot were actually never going to actually go public in the end if the players got knocked out.
Yeah. So even when we were making this ad, I would say that part of making this ad was actually watching the tennis and deciding and hoping that they were going to be able to play all of them.
Yeah.
So we don't know exactly when the players will be playing to actually place the ads they're in. This is us actually having to work out with Channel 9 that we really needed someone essentially to be manually sitting there and working out when to put the ad in, because basically we only got the schedule of play the day of.
And it's not like most sport it's not like most advertising where there's like 3 or 4 or 10 ads like every certain amount of time. They only put ads in the tennis when there's a lull in the game, when there's a gap. So they had to sit there literally. So you couldn't even like go, okay, we know there's going to be an ad at 8:30 p.m. The ads come whenever there's a hole. They just have ads ready to go as whenever there's a hole. So they actually had to sit there manually. And I think it was the first time they've ever done it. They had to sit there manually and make sure that they put the Rafa ad at the exact right time in his match and all the other players.
Yeah. And then there was a problem, which is that all the other sponsors were actually in our ads, and that's where you realise that the team is well beyond the creatives and the producers, because the client Georgie actually had to go and speak to all the people who were sponsoring, like ANZ and all those people, Kia, and actually speak to them about whether or not they're comfortable being in our ads or whether we have to pay them anyway. But actually, it worked out that they were very comfortable and just thought it was more free exposure.
I think that's it. I think that's one of the most interesting things about these ads too is, we all keep getting told about the science of the ad science, and you need branding in the first 3 seconds and all those different rules. These ads showed way more logos for Kia and ANZ and all the other sponsors than they did for Uber. Uber didn't actually show up till the last few seconds. So it was actually like Uber's role was they literally came in, right at the end. So it was a massive risk.
Yeah. I think also it's really good because Uber was not like the major sponsor of the tennis in any way, shape or form. But because of this, it almost worked backwards, and we got to sort of take credit for the sponsoring of other brands in our ads. So I think that was really powerful. And then basically whatever we ended up with, the plan was we'll just mix in last year's real crowd footage. And that's essentially because what we worked out was if we shot angles where you couldn't see the crowd, I think we managed to get 100 people or between 50 and 100 people that we could kind of move around the stadium to sort of be in the key seats at the front.
But in a stadium, they vanish very quickly. They're like 2 rows of people in a very, very tight section.
But suddenly, you have very, very, very limited number of camera angles where you realize you're not seeing crowd. But we had to make sure that crowd looked real enough that when we mixed it in with last year's crowd footage and added the sound effects of last year's crowd and all that sort of stuff, that it would blend in perfectly.
And that was only for one day we had last. So when we did it the first time, we had to use the year before's crowd for the first day. And then on the first Monday, they supplied us all the footage they shot on Monday with all the crowd footage from the Monday. And then we recut the ads with all that new footage to run from the Tuesday onwards. So it was all the current crowd footage because it has different logos and different sponsors in the right places. And
yeah, I think it's also really critical to sort of make you realize how impressive Georgie as a client was, because this whole time, pretty much until we're actually cutting the commercial and she sees it in the edit suite, she's believing us that this is all going to...
This will look like the tennis, yeah.
Yeah. And there was a really great conversation right at the beginning on the first moment of actually, like the first shot, where they turned on the graphics around the bar that goes around the whole tennis court, which is actually quite sort of bright and garish. And she sort of looked at it and she went, "Oh, that's pretty."
It was ugly.
It's pretty ugly and distracting. Like
it looked like the lottery. It was like tennis balls rolling around, and it was actually really ugly.
Yeah, and she said, "That's pretty distracting. Can we change that?" And we had to say to her, "No. What we've committed to is making it look exactly like the tennis."
So we knew that in that ad particular, it was a player sitting at the bench. And Tennis Australia said to us, when a player's sitting at the bench, that's what's going to be on the graphic behind them. So we had to make sure that when our player in our ad sits on the bench, it was the same graphic behind them. We couldn't fake it. We just didn't want to fake it. We wanted to do it 100% to what it was meant to be.
Yeah. And then once we did all this, and that was, an extremely short and intense sprint, and we thought the job was over, and we were all celebrating and thinking that we'd done a great thing, and we actually went to the tennis and relaxed. At the tennis, we realised that another talent had come through, which was the tennis player Sisyphus, and he basically said that he was willing to do one after he'd just been knocked out, and he was like beloved by the Australians because of his personality during the Open. And so suddenly, halfway through sitting in the tennis, we decided, we're going to have to make another one because that'll really surprise everyone again. And so we went into we walked out of our seats in the tennis, went to a boardroom that they lent us, and actually started writing scripts on the spot to shoot another ad the next day.
And that was with heaps of people. It wasn't just with him. We just looked at everyone. Like we knew Anna Wintour was in the crowd that year, so we wrote ads. What if Anna Wintour was in one of them? We literally wrote tons of different ones. And it was also because we knew the second week would have less original assets, so we just knew that the second week we'd want to make sure we had some new assets. And it's funny, the Sisyphus one, he was playing in the semis. And we were all sitting in a hotel downstairs at midnight that night when he was playing, waiting to see if he won or lost. Because if he won, we'd have to shoot different ads the next morning at 7 a.m. And if he lost, he might not want to shoot ads at 7 a.m. the next morning or 6 a.m. It was ridiculously early the next day. Yeah. So we were all sitting in a hotel waiting the night of the semis to see if he came off the ground and was still interested in shooting the next morning. So we flew down for a shoot that actually might not have happened.
I think also at this point, the trick had already sort of begun and it had actually been getting a bit of attention. And so there was sort of momentum behind the campaign. So there was a lot of motivation to keep going. So that was probably part of the reason why we kept following through. So in our mind, there are probably 3 things to take away from this experience. The first one is, and I think this is just something that we believe in across the board with what we've tried to do in our careers anyway, always bite off way more than you can chew and then build a team who can digest it, which is We love basically having ideas where we're not really sure how to do it. We can come up with an educated guess about how we think we might be able to do it, but then we just find people who basically want to get on that ride.
So like remote control tourists, we shipped in 30 people from America to make it happen. We've always done ideas we don't know how they're going to execute. And then we just make sure we have a team around us who, not only people around us who can work out how to make them happen, but people who embrace hard work like we do and embrace things that are really, really difficult like we do.
Yeah. I think that's probably why we do a lot of work with the Glue Society, because I know they definitely share that spirit. This is a critical one as well. I think that in a job like this, moving this fast, doing something this unknown, the titles, the roles, creatives, clients, suits, producers, directors, media planners, buyers, yes, absolutely, everyone has core responsibilities they have to do. But the truth is, everyone just becomes a team that makes it happen. Any problems are solved with great solutions can come from anywhere, and you have to listen and you have to embrace it. And frankly, it's a really, really great way to work.
Yeah, it wasn't even just internal roles. Like there was no hierarchy or no particular roles in our business because we were literally all just sitting as a huddle trying to work out how to make it work the whole time. But even the way we worked with Tennis Australia, Channel 9, Mediacom, there's even more involved than that. But everyone just had to collaborate and work out how to make it all happen, because if Channel 9 couldn't do the ads the way they did, it wouldn't have worked. Like it literally was Tennis Australia were getting us all the work, helping us get all the players and letting us on the court early in the morning. Like everyone had to work together perfectly to make that happen. So there was no hierarchy, there was no egos. You just had to all work together and see what you could do.
Yeah, and I think there was almost like an infectious sort of energy about the whole thing, which was trying to pull it off. Like I think everyone got a bit addicted to the thought of actually trying to, figure it out. As it was an incredible challenge for everyone involved, which was great. And then finally, I think, and this is something that is really, really important, is openly discuss the glass and the clay of an idea, and then make everyone in every aspect of it know it backwards.
So Jules and I, we probably should do it. We did a talk recently for ISO dates about making the unmakeable, and Jules and I have got a philosophy called glass and clay, and we should probably do a talk on it at some stage. But it's how we break down what actually makes an idea, and what is the glass is the part of the idea that breaks if you change it, and the clay is what can be molded and changed. It's way more complex than that, but that's the simplest way to explain it. It's how we make sure everyone in the process and everyone understands actually what the idea is that we're embracing and what we're doing together. And when you've got a job like this where it's not just everyone at Special, everyone at Glue, everyone at Uber Eats, there's also everyone at Mediacom, everyone at Channel 9, everyone at Tennis Australia. Everyone had to understand exactly what this idea was, exactly what the main part of this idea was, and what they could play with and what they couldn't play with, and what was going to break things. So it was vital with this job, especially because you had 5 weeks from getting briefed to being on TV, and also the pressure of getting it made at the tennis on the court. Everyone had to exactly know what we're doing.
Yeah,
and we do this for every job.
Yeah, I think it's pretty obvious also with this one. The glass is, if it doesn't look like the real tennis, then the idea shatters. Well, the clay is any tennis, which tennis player you use, what food they order, what scenario in the tennis, as long as it's real. Those are all clay. While the glass is absolutely retaining the absolute sincerity of trying to keep it to look exactly like tennis.
And if you have that conversation right at the start and you break down these two aspects, it just means that no one asks. It just means no one goes on tangents or has conversations that are going to change the idea or break the idea, because everyone from the start is on board with what's what. And if they're not on board, you have those discussions way at the start. You're not on a shoot and things are falling apart. Like, of course, we had that discussion Jules did about the back plate behind the tennis play. But as soon as we said to our client, in our mind, that's glass because that's actually what makes it look like tennis. She's like, oh, yeah, it is actually. No worries. Because that was a discussion we'd had the whole way along. So we just knew it just meant that there was no curveballs or no things going awry.
And that's the presentation. So
it's 3:30, exactly half an hour.
Which is very unlike us if you've seen us do any talks together normally.
Yeah, we ramble.
I might take you off share now, off screen share.
Sorry, that's my dog. That's our dog.
Right. Maddie and Dave,
Well, firstly, thank you. It's great to look under the hood of such a powerful idea that's been so successful. Just from a personal standpoint, I remember vividly when this campaign you guys created with your team went to air, and there was this universal reaction in the press and in the real world, outside of advertising, where people were like, "Oh, that's so clever." And I think anyone in the industry instantly had the reverse feeling of like, "Oh God, that would have been painful." Like, how did they do that? that must have been a real journey. So well done. It's something that probably has made everyone universally jealous, which is always the kind of trademark of great work. We're going to take a few questions from the crowd now, hopefully, and we've got a few up our sleeve if we don't get any enough questions. We've got one that's come through already, which we might start with, which I think is a fantastic question. And it's from a person called Anonymous Attendee.
Love that person.
At what times did this idea almost fall over? And how did you flex to keep it alive? It'd be great to hear some of the survival stories. I mean, obviously we've heard a few, but there must be some darker moments in there that you can shed some light on for us.
There was a funny time right at the start when we presented it to all Channel 9, all those people who I said earlier. They went away to digest it, and they came back like a day later. And I was sitting in a boardroom, and one of them, and I'm not going to say where he's from because I actually really like this person, but he got up and went, "Great idea. I reckon it could work like this." And then he presented the opposite idea, like a totally different idea. And that was a moment where we're like, "Oh God, this is not going to fly." But it's not even just Jules. Our client Georgie is amazingly, she's amazingly. I was going to say bullish, but it's not even the right word. She just knows how to make work happen. So she just knew how to get everyone in her on that side back on board and get it right.
I also think it was a bit of a stars align moment where Channel 9 had just taken over the sponsorship, had taken over the rights to the tennis over Channel 7. And so Channel 9 had basically looked at this idea and go, this is how everyone's going to remember that we've taken over the tennis, as in like something's different this year. So they got on board and I think that they were almost trying to send a message to everyone else out there or the other sponsors that if you want to do really creative ideas as part of tennis sponsorship now with us, you can. So I think that we probably got a lot of, for lack of a better word, unfair momentum to sort of knock down a lot of walls that maybe, would have been there in previous years.
I don't think Channel 7, who had the tennis before, would have probably done it because they had a certain way of working. I think Channel 9 really wanted to prove themselves and wanted to change how the sponsorship model worked. So I think that did work in our favour. I just saw we're getting trolled in our Q&A. Somebody just said, I hate this idea. I'm like, what are you doing here? Listening to us talk then.
Yes, I don't know how to stop those trolls, but they live amongst us. I'm wondering whether we do it in order, but there is a question here that I think is quite interesting, and it will speak to your relationship with Georgie. It sounds really strong, and I want to drill into that a little bit later. But how did you manage a budget for a project like this that's constantly evolving?
Good question. With the tennis players, we knew we needed one top tier, and then we tiered it down. Like that was the simplest way. And it's the same as how we do every Tonight I'll Be Eating ad. Like we always do like 2 or 3 at a time, and we always know there's tiers of talent. There's like, so last time there was Kim Kardashian. We know there's one of them, and there's a few in the middle and a few of the bottom ones. It is about tiering a lot of the talent. That played a massive role. Like we knew we were only going to get one top tier tennis player. So the first year it was Nadal, and this year it was one of the Williams sisters.
I think also it's more affordable than people imagine in their heads because as you realise now, we're only talking about an hour of their time.
And 2 weeks of TV.
2 weeks. So you actually get, like most tennis players, particularly once you get, beyond the people who already are doing a lot of ads and a lot of sponsorship deals, are actually relatively keen to do something. So, I think we had a lot of access.
I think we're really lucky too. A lot of the tennis players, when they're not playing tennis, they're sitting in a building on the premises of the arena watching tennis, and they all saw the ads in the first few days, and then they started approaching to do one. So we're quite lucky that a lot of tennis players wanted to get involved. So that job wasn't as expensive as it looks.
Yep. There's a great question that's just come in that I must admit crossed my mind as well, and must have been really on your minds right before this went live. Was there a fallback plan if things didn't work? Or was it just you're committed, it's game on?
We had a retail promotion running under it,
Yes.
which was called Aussies and You Win, and it was a Big Mac deal that every time, as long as Aussies were in the Australian Open, we were discounting Big Macs, and it would get cheaper and cheaper throughout the Open. So that layer of retail work was going to run no matter what, it was running throughout, and then that was really what was doing sales. Most of the Tonight I'll Be Eating ads with the tennis players, it was more just to lift the brand, I think.
Yeah.
So it wasn't, there was a layer of work that we knew would get sales, which helped enormously.
Yeah, I also think it's really about the definition of what failure is, because I think in our minds and in like the client's mind and everything was perfectly replicating the tennis and making it, do the surprise and all that sort of thing. But if it hadn't actually worked the way we intended, it would have just become basic sponsorship ads.
Yeah.
Where tennis
and
players,
there are a lot of tennis player sponsor ads where tennis players are on the court playing tennis with like Mario, or there's a Kia one or whatever. They do there are a lot of ads on the court. So I guess at the worst, it just would have been another one of those ads.
Yeah. It just wouldn't have been it wouldn't have had the impact or the brand, the brand rise that we were hoping for, but it still would have been a perfectly serviceable sponsorship, campaign.
Okay, so that's a good insight. There's a good question here that I think might be a good follow-up, which is asking around, did you get that this is a great idea feeling, or did you just run with it and keep working until it was great? But I wonder whether if I reframe that and go, when did you know it was going to be great? Because you've taken a chance at some point here. You kind of can see you can see what it can be, but you're still not sure, and it's so much in the execution. When did that penny kind of drop for you guys?
I think we imagined it could be great from the moment we went, if you execute it exactly like the tennis, then we knew it could be great. I think we realized that we were probably going to be able to pull it off, like that moment where we were going, when we saw, because when we were actually on set on the tennis court, we had a split which was cut down into 4. So we saw all 4 cameras at once. And we saw the first, I think Kyrgios might have been the first one. We saw them actually do it. And because you're only seeing the split, not the empty stadium, and we were watching it and we went, oh, that looks like tennis. Wow. Like he was just like, oh, that does look like tennis. And
well,
then
we were all sitting together at the office the night it went live, and I know I was quietly terrified.
Oh yeah, definitely. I think we were more scared that they were going to run it in the wrong spot. Actually.
Yeah, there was that too. And whether they were going to be wearing the same clothes, because I meant to be wearing the identical clothes, and there's so many things that could have gone wrong.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think we were terrified the whole way through, really.
Awesome.
Should we do a quick poll?
We might do a quick poll. There's a question here that kind of goes along with it. So Zoom has a polling function. I'll just put this up for everyone. But there is a serious question here as well, which kind of goes with it. Who was the easiest to direct and who was the worst?
Nick Kyrgios was the easiest.
He was a freaking delight.
He's lovely. And that's why we brought him back here too. He was lovely, really easy.
Do you know what was actually the most insightful thing about making us realise how lovely Nick was? Nick Kyrgios did an execution with Li Lin Chin. If you know anything about Li Lin Chin in real life, she is like super frail. And she was like really quite nervous, and we had them mic'd up and we were just listening to him make her feel good, like for about half an hour. Like he was just geeing her up and just making her feel great about being part of it and all that. And he didn't have to do that. And he was just like being so nice to her that we just went, this guy's actually like not who we think he is. And so he was actually really helpful and useful. And that's why he was great. Both years.
That's awesome. We've got another question that's come through. Firstly, it starts by saying great presentation. So well done. Would love to know metrics for the campaign. I mean, obviously it's wildly successful, but can you speak at all to some of the results that might have come through across the course of it?
It definitely helped with the brand awareness metrics. It's very hard to sort of separate the metrics of Aussies in You Win, which was running in parallel, and with the actual results of the campaign itself, because Aussies in You Win was incredibly successful and went off like a frog in a sock. And that obviously is driving people to the app, and that is actually making people order things and all that sort of stuff. But overall, it actually had a really, really positive effect in actual orders, throughout the 2 weeks. And as I said, it and I think this is probably what we're also super proud of. It basically made everyone think that Uber Eats was the major sponsor of the tennis when they weren't.
Yeah, I think there's also, and from the start of Tenala Eating, when it was done year one, there's always a desire for Tenala Eating to become vernacular and just something to get into culture. And for year one and year two, it really was still in advertising. And I think when this happened, I really saw the power of that campaign. I feel like it was one of those campaigns where the first year was like, it was not particular, like it was not a loved campaign necessarily year one. I'll try to put it nicely, but I think when that campaign happened, everyone saw the power of that idea.
Yeah. There's a question I might jump off of that, where you kind of spoke about Uber Eats felt like it was the dominant sponsor of the tennis. So there's a really interesting question here, I think. What do you tell your client, Georgie, next year, hooked on the success of the campaign? Do you do tennis again and try and beat it, or do you do something different?
That's a question we definitely have we did it again the second year, and it worked again.
We made it much harder for ourselves the second year.
Yeah. We worked on the premise that we would never do the same trick twice, and we would do a different one for every day of the tennis, and that made it like infinitely harder. That was like yeah. Because it means that we needed much more ads again to make sure that we had something if someone got knocked out. And we also did things like flashbacks to McEnroe in the 1980s and all sorts of things. It was actually, it's fun, but it just becomes more and more like a Rubik's Cube.
Knowing what you know now, if you were going to attack a campaign like this again, would you do anything differently?
I'd give ourselves more time.
Yeah, but
probably.
Yes and no to that answer though, because yes, absolutely, the time would alleviate the pressure, but the lack of time also made us, probably streamline even more than usual.
Yeah, it didn't give anyone time to second guess what we were doing, and I don't mean not client side or our side or anyone. I just think there was a lot of players involved who realised how hard it was and probably could have got shaky if we had more time, probably. So that's true.
Yeah,
I think the lack of time probably did help us, but it is one of those things that we've been in presentations with a lot of with Channel 9 and other people since who have on-sold that idea. So even though I think it did wonders for Uber Eats and everyone involved, I think it's done really well for the Tennis Australia and the Australian Open and Channel
9. So there's a good question here, which is something I'd like to probe in personally as well, is would you have taken on this brief and this project if the relationship with your client wasn't as solid? And then if you could expand on that a little bit as well. And obviously your relationship with Georgie is a great one because great work is coming out of it, and you're taking that brand to higher and higher heights. How do you go about building trust with clients, and what's your kind of thinking behind this? What kind of tips could you give people?
It's challenging because I sort of believe that good client relationships are like friendships, where essentially great friendships are, you have a really big fight and you can still be friends. I think that's true of relationship with clients as well. If you can have a serious, debate, have come at it from two completely different angles, fight about something and still come out, respecting each other and actually working together well and actually walking away better for it, that's a great client relationship. And to be honest with you, I think the first time we sort of worked with Georgie, we sort of butted heads straight away and then got over it and then realised, oh, okay, this is going to work.
I also don't think in our past we've ever done a job like this as our first job with a client. Like, you have to build trust up first. We've done Like, Matty, you mentioned Magic Salad Plate. We did other jobs with them first to build up trust, and they knew they had trust with us, so we could do a job like that. Like most of the jobs we've done that don't feel like advertising or don't fit into the normal confines of advertising, we have done normal jobs with them first or built trust up over at least 12 months to 2 years before we do a job like this. I don't think you'd want to do a job like AO Ambush as your first job with a client. It was really tough. Like, you had to have hard conversations the whole time, and you had to be in the trenches together the whole time, debating what can work, what can't work, how many ads you could shoot, who we're going to shoot next. Like, you needed an amazing relationship that you just would never want to do a job like this as your first job with a new client. Trust is vital.
It does feel like the classic idea that would win a pitch and then die. If it was the first thing you did
definitely.
With a new client, it would be like, they're perfect, but that's risky, you know. And like the timing of managing that relationship is just as important as the timing of the campaign itself, I imagine.
Oh yeah, definitely. You had to have like we came out of it even tighter with the client, and that's because we worked so well together. We worked well together before it. But I think if it was the first job with the client, you'd either come out really tight or you'd hate each other's guts.
There's a great question that's come through from Tolga that is there one thing you weren't able to do that you really bloody wish you could have done, apart from getting Federer?
I think we were all really hoping that someone would do like a killer serve, and we never got one. I think because we were always going, okay, we want moments where people absolutely believe, you know, you're watching tennis. And I think the thing that we thought would really, you know, be something that no one could, you'd never undeniably, you know, say as tennis if someone did a killer serve. I also think there was probably, because you know, you're basically brainstorming every possible scenario. And I know we've done this for 2 years, so we've even thought of even more scenarios. Like, it would just, I mean, it's really how willing is the open, you know, going to be to you hijacking. And like, so we were going, would, for example, you let us pretend to do the ceremony at the end, you know, with the winner?
We tried to do that.
Yeah. You know, could we get like another sponsor like Kia, the guy from Kia?
We tried to get the CEO of Kia to do one. We thought it'd be really funny if because he always gets up and does a speech. We thought it'd be really funny if the CEO of Kia did one.
Yeah.
Weirdly, he said no. I don't know why, but he said no.
Yeah, but I can't understand what happened there.
But also, Jules and I do. We ask for the world, though, and I think that's something you've got to do. We always ask for stuff that is wildly unrealistic, and just see if it sticks. Like getting the CEO of Kia to do one is just an idiotic ask, but you may as well ask.
Yeah.
All he can say is no, and he said no, but no one got hurt in the process.
We did ask in the first year to get Rod Laver to do it, and then he said no, and then the second year he decided he would do it.
Yeah.
So there you go.
There you go.
Yeah, it is one of those things. I think a big benefit of Uber Eats is that people don't feel necessarily like they're doing an ad for Uber Eats because they're really just saying what they're having for dinner. So it has given us the ability to work with a lot of amazing talent because they don't. It's not like a campaign where you get one celebrity. They're the whole campaign. They're the face of that brand. Because it doesn't work that way. It does mean a lot more people who probably wouldn't do advertising do advertising.
So
that does help.
There's kind of like a follow-up question in the chat, which I quite like as well. Did you present any alternative concepts or did you just go back in with this?
It was just this.
Yeah.
We had, like Jill said, we had an idea where we thought it'd be funny. It was part of this idea. We thought it'd be funny if during the tennis you heard us like a grumbly sound, and then later on we revealed it was the cameraman's. But they were like, "There's no way because of the integrity of the tennis." But we only went in with this one. It was a short deadline. We knew this one was going to work. We didn't know it was going to work, but we knew it was the right answer. So
yeah.
Just in some good news, what we thought was a troll was not a troll.
Oh,
it
good.
was someone who couldn't get the spacing right, and it's not the chat UI, which I also get frustrated with. But his point was that when he first saw the ad, he thought it was super annoying, but then the brilliance of the message kind of sat in his brain, and he suddenly found himself wondering what he was going to eat that night. And then he kind of found a love for the ad. So that's
nice.
That's the apology, which I think is great.
Quite the journey.
He did also go on to say it's a brilliant idea, well executed, and amazingly planned out. Kudos to the entire team and client for championing such a great idea. So we may have jumped in too early there.
Yes, I'm sorry I called you a troll, whoever you are.
On the self-defense.
I'm going to do a quick other poll, because it leads to another question of something a little birdie told us. Would you hire Julian as a wardrobe assistant? Would you like to tell us a little bit about this, Julian?
That's very funny. Which one is Julian again? Is very
Okay. Yes. I'm wearing, if anyone knows me at all, they know that I wear the same clothes effectively every day, because I don't like to think about it very hard, which is essentially a blue shirt and black jeans, even in COVID.
Yeah,
we heard a story that during the shoot you might have had to run off to buy wardrobe for everyone.
Oh, yeah. Oh, we did actually. So that is true.
Weird story. Okay, so...
We did know that never ran. We did know with Nick Kyrgios's brother.
Yes, and...
Christos. Christos the year before had snuck in and opened his shirt and revealed that he had a sports bet T-shirt on, I think it was. So we thought it would be funny if Christos stood up with a sports bet T-shirt on and then took it off and revealed underneath he had an Uber Eats T-shirt on.
So I basically, we sort of realised that was probably going to happen, but we didn't actually have time to print a T-shirt. So I ran around Melbourne. I used to live in Melbourne, so it was actually fine to do because I kind of knew where it was. Ran to Fitzroy, found a T-shirt printing shop which could do something in an hour. Didn't know what size the guy was, bought every size possible, got it printed, and then ran to the shoot with them. Only to realise that the shoot wasn't going to happen.
Yeah, we did shoot with him. It just that particular ad just got a bit it got a bit too punchy, and I don't think Sportsbet were keen. And
yeah, it got complicated.
It got complicated, that one, unfortunately.
We've got a brief question from a legend of the industry that's just come through. Jeff Goodby asks, Jules, tonight what will you be eating?
Most likely fried rice.
There you go.
Good answer. Solid.
Good choice.
Okay, there's quite a lot of questions coming in now, which is awesome. Let me just find a good one.
I can jump in here.
Do it.
Paul Edwards has got a good question. These ads certainly got a lot of notice, and it's great to see the level of craft. Take my hat off to you. One question I have, though, is the blurring of editorial versus commercial. Was this ever an issue? Cheers from Paul.
Do you know, I think we were waiting for this to potentially be an issue. But I think that the thing that sort of let us get away with it, and I know there was some, I think there might have even been a complaint that got dismissed about this, is essentially because it's very clearly an ad by the end. Like, it might start out not looking like an ad, but because it's very clearly an ad by the end, you sort of saved. So it didn't cross into the line of editorial. I think what it shows, though, is that, and this is the premise, entirely the premise of the whole idea, is that you're in a different mindset when you're watching something that isn't advertising. You're engaged. You want to actually pay attention. You want to stare at it and watch it. But when an ad comes on, we all switch off. And I think that's something that in this industry we battle every day, is how do I get the mind that doesn't want to pay attention. And so this whole campaign was really about cheating and tricking you into thinking you weren't watching an ad, so you were paying attention. And then suddenly we hit you with an ad message at the end. And that is why people say, is it editorial in a sort of in its executional style? And it is, but it's still very much an ad.
Yeah. It is an ad in one sense, but you're kind of playing with a cultural moment as well. And there's a question in the chat here around, did you pay any attention to the social response? And was there anything that was kind of going on, any favourite tweets or hot takes out of that?
It was, I think the We were more waiting to see if it got negative, I think, was more the concern than whether there was something positive. I think everyone was just worried that it would. I think there was a slight concern that we'd just annoy the hell out of everyone. So I think there was a concern that it would go that way. I think we were really relieved after the first night where it was majority had a positive sentiment online. I think if it went all negative the first night, there probably would have been some quick meetings to work out what we're doing and is this really the right thing to do. But because it went so positive the first night in social, I think it was a massive relief. And when we were worried the first night about sitting there nervously the first night, I think a lot of that nerves was how it was going to be received and whether it was just going to annoy everyone.
Yeah. I've got a question for me, if I'm allowed. Am I allowed to ask my own questions?
No, we discussed this.
Oh.
Yeah.
It's kind of a little bit more, we're talking about cultural moments and, there's something big going on in the world right now with COVID. An idea like this now, is it something that you kind of try and approach, or what are the kinds of restraints that you're kind of seeing that you're having to work within? And then how are you creatively leaping out of that box?
Good question.
It's a really good question. I think we're lucky and unlucky at the same time, because I think we're lucky because the bones of Tonight I'll Be Eating as a concept and is someone essentially turning to camera and saying a catchphrase, which is pretty flexible, which means you can have one person, you can have multiple people. I think that some of the most fun is when you pair people together, and in a world right now where you're not really allowed to be together, that does suddenly create parameters which weren't there before. Plus, there's a lot of conversation about, frankly, what does it mean having someone hand you food? All those sort of things. So we're definitely navigating that, but I do think, creatively speaking, with Tonight I'll Be Eating as a concept, it's pretty flex.
Yeah.
So yeah. So we're just sort of figuring out what are the right executions that are appropriate for this time, more than can we do it or not.
You guys spoke before about, I suppose, removing hierarchy from your team to get a job like this done. Can you let us in a little bit on just what's necessary to make that happen, and a business that is often very hierarchical, to get a flat structure of just creative people together of all different types to try and make something really tricky happen? What do you consider the necessary ingredients to do that?
I think even in big, even Jules and I are in big agencies like Clems and stuff, as soon as you've got an idea that you all rally behind, you sort of create a team anyway. You sort of get a smaller team going, and I don't think it's any different in Special Group than it was at Clems or JL in America or whatever. And really, there's just a group of people who are trying to be useful and trying to make something better. Jules and I have never really seen hierarchy or felt there was a hierarchy in agencies, but it's just really about getting the right group of people together and just trying to make things better and better and better.
Yeah. I think basically if you in that team set a culture where it's okay to say dumb things if it's like in the service of trying to solve a problem, so everyone feels comfortable just saying what they think, hierarchy disappears pretty quickly, because suddenly people aren't scared of saying stuff in front of people that they're worried about, have an impact on their job. But if you're going, actually, the goal here is actually to solve the problem, and you're going to be rewarded as much for participation and effort in solving that problem as in who you are, then I think people's mindset changes. And I think also people feel much more valued, realizing that they're, as much part of the creative and the making culture as being defined by any particular role in the agency. Everyone still has to do their core responsibilities. That's never just because we're all part of this team, it doesn't mean that the producer is now writing scripts. But it certainly does mean that, if they have an idea for a script, they should definitely say it.
And that happened tons on this job, because literally there was a whole lot of us huddled around at the tennis, and I couldn't tell you who said what idea to what script, or who said, oh, look, maybe we should do this with that person, and it could have been anyone, because it was literally just probably a group of 15 to 20 people all just trying to work out how the hell to make it work. So, yeah.
Sarah's just trying to tell me this is the last question, but no, it's too good having you on the thing. One last question here, though, is you spoke about glass and clay earlier, which I think Tony and the team at Comms Council should get you to do a talk on that, because I really like that framework. Someone was listening as well. If, for any reason, someone was insistent on breaking the glass, what would you do?
We just start again.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of glass and clay, is saying to everyone with glass and clay, look, this is the glass and clay of this idea. If you don't like this idea and the glass of it, let's shatter it and come up with another glass.
Somebody at work said it, and this is a horrible saying, but you're better off killing a baby than a toddler. like if you it's brutal, but if you set up a quick poll, hang on, but if you set up with the glass and clays right at the start, and you all get on board straight away, or if somebody says, actually, I don't like that, you just start again.
You got to just go, okay. Precious.
You can't be precious.
No, you just need to. That's why it's really important that you define with everyone, and make sure you have language as well, that everyone understands the idea, so they know what they're buying and not buying.
Yeah, and we have conversations with that client, Georgie. We have meetings with her every day
I think big
on other
for
jobs.
us is, you can't make people do what they don't want to do.
So Jules was just cutting out, but yeah, as Jules has said, you can't make people do what they don't want to do, and we never want to, because there's nothing worse than trying to drag someone along to make a job. It just never works. So we're much happier to kill an idea quickly and just work and start again and work out what the next best idea, what is another idea that does what they want it to do.
Awesome. Well done on getting such a dangerous and tricky idea out into the world. That must have been a serious effort and a big journey to go on. I encourage you to find a better analogy.
I definitely will. It wasn't mine, thankfully.
Before you quickly distance yourself. I don't blame you. I might hand over to Tara, but thank you very much for joining us, and look forward to seeing the next iteration. Tara?
Okay. That concludes our first Work Behind the Work. Thank you so much, Tom and Jules. So many amazing things there to learn from, and insights, and what an amazing piece of work you got out. So, fantastic to hear more about that. And thanks to Maddie and Dave for moderating. And see you all next time. Hope everyone enjoyed it.
Awesome. Bye. Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everyone.